Here we are in Cancun, Mexico at COP16 with Alyson, Brody and Georgina Aboud. Alyson, can you tell me a little bit about your organization and what brings you to the COP?
Sure, I work for an organisation called Bridge, and we're an information development programme based at the Institute of Development Studies in the UK. And what we're working on at the moment is a programme on gender and climate change. And this programme really intends to bring together different stakeholders from all around the world in a collaborative process to develop effective solutions and effective key messages on gender and climate change, because we feel that even though people are talking about gender in the context of climate change, it's really not enough, and what we need to do is inform that with as many diverse voices as we can. So a key resource coming out of this programme will be what's called a cutting edge pack, which will be a report that draws on recent cutting-edge research and really tries to communicate that in very accessible ways for policymakers and practitioners, so they can really apply that in their work in a constructive way, in a way that's very much evidence-based.
Georgina, can you tell me why it's so important to integrate gender into climate change policy?
There are lots of reasons to integrate gender into climate change policy. I'll just go through maybe a couple of them. The first one is around access to resources. Climate change exacerbates existing gender inequalities and women's access to resources. Resources like land, property and credit. So for example, women own a lot less land than men. And in a country like Brazil, where there is no legitimate constraint for women owning land, they still only own 11%. When you add that to the issue of climate change, it really prevents women from being able to diversify their livelihood strategies when times get very tough. Other reasons to integrate gender into climate change policy include stuff around a needs analysis. So basically, it's a practical approach to make policies more effective by looking at the requirements of men and women when you're creating policy and what they're doing and needing on the ground.
So what are the challenges then in terms of getting it integrated into policy?
I think this COP16 has been really interesting in the way that gender has been brought up. In a few high-level sessions that I've attended, gender has been present. I think the challenge is getting people to think about gender and engage with it in a much deeper way. When people talk about gender, they often just talk about women, when in fact gender is about social relationships and the power dynamics between men and women, and those issues are really important because they structure the way society behaves. There's also issues around the way women are portrayed. Very often women are seen as being vulnerable and victims in climate change situations. Actually, women are hugely agents of change, and already they are performing masses of adaptation and mitigation strategies across the world. And I think if we're going to really seriously tackle climate change, we need to look at women as part of the solution.
Those who experience climate change at a very visceral, personal level, they should be able to gather that. They should be able to engage people at the grassroots level in formulating that information and really packaging it in a way that's going to feed directly into policy, which will give clear directions for what's needed. And I think at the moment that's missing. I think there are a few people out there who are getting a lot of money. They're throwing it in certain countries like Africa, in certain regions like Africa, and other regions like Latin America or Asia or even Europe are being completely marginalised from that. So you get a very one-dimensional picture. The other thing about the evidence is it's very focused on rural areas. So development is very often just associated with rural areas, whereas this is a problem for urban areas too. And more you find in developing countries that people are moving from rural to urban areas. They live a kind of transitional life as migrants, and that just isn't being represented. So I think it's more diverse information, it's better communication of it, and it's being really clear about what needs to change.